We begin tonight with that historic prisoner exchange. At this hour, several Americans are on their way home after a landmark multinational deal involving the U.S., Russia, and other American allies. President Biden celebrating what he described as a feat of diplomacy. 24 prisoners changing hands, the White House calling it the most complicated swap in history. 3 Americans and a U.S. green card holder set to reunite with their families, including former Marine Paul Whelan and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. The exchange months in the making. The prisoners flown from Russia to Turkey, then handed off to U.S. officials. Vladimir Putin turning over 16 prisoners, getting 8 back in return, including a Russian hitman convicted of killing a Chechen rebel in Berlin. At the White House, President Biden with families in the Oval Office, speaking with their loved ones for the first time since their release. And the staff at the Wall Street Journal applauding in the newsroom today, the Journal calling it a joyous day. Right now, the former prisoners are on the move, scheduled to arrive at Joint Base Andrews later tonight. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will be there to greet them. ABC's chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce leading us off tonight.
After years of agony and painstaking negotiations behind the scenes, tonight these are the first images of the American prisoners leaving Russia, their first tastes of freedom, seen on a bus to the airfield, then being led across the tarmac by soldiers and onto a waiting plane. Among them, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, appearing to crack a smile in his seat. It is the largest, most complicated prisoner swap since the Cold War, playing out this afternoon in tense moments on an airfield in Ankara, Turkey. It's a sweeping deal involving 24 prisoners in at least 6 different countries. 4 prisoners released to the United States. American citizens Gershkovich, former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, Russian-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva, and U.S. green card holder Vladimir Kara-Murza, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and a critic of the Kremlin. Back at the White House, the president gathering their families in the Oval Office the moment the swap was complete, the president telling them the good news. Then getting on the phone, the families speaking for the first time with their loved ones, knowing they are finally on their way home. On the other end of the line, the Americans, all smiles, posing for pictures with the American flag, and then boarding the plane to finally make their way to the U.S. Shortly after the president, the families by his side announcing it to the world.
Their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free.
The president noting Kurmasheva's daughter, Miriam, will now be able to celebrate her 13th birthday tomorrow with her mother by her side.
Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along.
Biden heralding the deal as a sign of the power of diplomacy.
The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again.
The president directly involved in the negotiations. Even the hour before Biden announced he would not seek re-election, the president working the phones, trying to get this deal across the finish line. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also deeply involved, today overcome by the emotion of the moment and relief.
I spent a lot of time with the families of Evan and Paul and Alsu, and most of the time, as you can imagine, those are tough conversations, but not today. Excuse me. Today was a very good day.
Tonight, we are told initially talks also included the possible release of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, but he died in February behind bars. And administration officials saying it felt like the wind had been taken out of our sails, but they still saw a path forward, just a more rocky one. The linchpin to negotiations, Russia's insistence that it include the release of convicted murderer, Russian hitman Vadim Krasikov. But he was being held in Germany. President Biden then reaching out directly to the German chancellor.
This deal would not have been made possible without our allies. Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey, they all stepped up, and they stood with us. They stood with us. And they made bold and brave decisions. Released prisoners being held in their countries who are justifiably being held, and provided logistical support to get the Americans home. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter.
Vice President Kamala Harris also appealing to allies face-to-face at a global security summit in February. Today, she too is celebrating.
We never stopped fighting for their release. And today, in spite of all of their suffering, it gives me great comfort to know that their horrible ordeal is finally over.
Gershkovich's release comes just 13 days after he was sentenced to 16 years in a Russian penal colony in a secret trial with no public evidence presented, convicted for what the U.S. government called fabricated charges of espionage. The 32-year-old was the first American journalist arrested for spying in Russia since the Cold War, detained in March 2023 while on assignment, accused of passing information to the CIA. Tonight, the Wall Street Journal's newsroom erupting in cheers at the news of his release. His family saying in a statement, "We have waited 491 days for Evan's release, and it's hard to describe what today feels like. We can't wait to give him the biggest hug and see his sweet and brave smile up close." Paul Whelan had been behind bars for nearly 6 years, serving a 16-year sentence for similar sham espionage charges. The 54-year-old security consultant was visiting Russia for a friend's wedding when he was arrested, slapped with charges that he, his family, and the U.S. fiercely denied. In all, 16 individuals held in Russia now free, including some Russian political prisoners. In exchange, allies releasing 8 Russian prisoners, tonight welcomed home by President Putin.
Truly a remarkable day. Mary Bruce joining us now from the White House. So, Mary, walk us through the next steps here for those freed Americans and when they're expected back on U.S. soil.
Well, the 3 Americans are expected to touch down finally back home late tonight, just before midnight, at Joint Base Andrews. There to greet them will be their families, the president, and the vice president. And tonight we are hearing from one of the few people who may truly be able to understand what they're going through. Brittany Griner, who was released back in 2022, saying tonight that she is head over heels happy for their families, saying any day Americans come home is a win.
Joy and relief for those loved ones. Mary, thank you.